All right, and we are live. So thank you guys for joining me for our 2025 Q2 book club. Um, our second quarter, Q2 being second quarter of the year, we always do a nonfiction book about something art history or just nonfiction, artist biography, that kind of thing. Um, so that was the book that we read. We are expecting one more person to get on here, and hopefully he does join because this was his pick. But before all of that, I'm going to go ahead and do my standard front of club meeting spiel that everybody who watches this already knows. But just in case this is your first time here with us, this is our book club, which is a quarterly book club. Um, we read one every 3 months. So our next pick is going to be announced tomorrow. It is going to be a fiction book published before the year 2000. So if you'd like to join us for that next book club, check out the announcement when it happens tomorrow. On top of our book club announcement, we have our standard monthly clubs, our movie club, and our listening club. We already had our meetings for this month, but the next picks will also be chosen tomorrow. And if you do happen to want to listen to our talks about the boys in the band or Wayne Kramer, absolutely, you can find those on YouTube. I think if you're in our Facebook group, we have some links to them. And please comment on them and let us know your opinions if you do check these out. This is the link to our Facebook group. It's where we post all of the new picks for our multimedia clubs. It's also where we post any sort of announcements we have for our group. And it's just a collection of creatives talking about problems and successes of being creatives. It's a really, really supportive group. Absolutely check us out. And if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, we do have a Patreon, which you can support us for as little as $2 a month. We don't have any special perks or anything. Everything we offer is free to our Facebook group. All of the meetups and all of the Zoom calls and things like that are all free. But we do appreciate any sort of support to help us run those things. So yeah, we'd really appreciate it if you could support us over there. I feel like I need to get used to saying at the start of these that there's going to be spoilers, but since this is a nonfiction book, it's kind of hard to spoil history. But let's talk about Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, or how the sex, drugs, and rock and roll generation saved Hollywood. I know that Tim has read this book multiple times. I think he said that this was his fifth time reading. You're muted.
Oh, am I?
Oh, not anymore. I think Beckett unmuted you.
Oh, she was probably annoyed at something I was doing.
No, I muted her because she was eating, and she retaliated by muting you.
No, your mic often echoes, so I was trying to avoid any, but okay. Never mind. Continue.
Is it echoing now?
Not at the moment.
Is the echo in the room with us?
It was preemptive.
I'm kidding.
So how many times have you read this book, Tim?
That's 5. Let's go with 5. It's probably more, but I honestly haven't kept track.
This was my first time reading this book.
Okay.
I think it's safe to say that you really like this book.
I do. It's, the American New Wave is, those are the films that I grew up with. They were very formative for me this whole period. So I've studied it intensively. And I'm fascinated. But a lot of these stories in here are apocryphal. It's definitely hard to tell who's stretching the truth. And, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
I definitely want to talk about Peter Biskind and his kind of viewpoint on this. Because I have read some reviews. I've read some thoughts from people who are profiled in the book and their opinions on this book. Beckett, did you like reading the book?
Like is an interesting word. I was fascinated by it. Yeah.
It's a lot of information crammed into a book. I mean, I have it here, but it's a whole slew of people too.
Yeah.
Um,
I don't care for his writing style that much. But yeah, it's like information dump. There's not a lot, there's no like analysis, there's nothing, it's just like, here's what happened, here's who said what.
It's a very he said, she said kind of book. It's very anecdotal in a lot of its things, but it definitely does. I definitely learned a lot more about this and realized how few of these movies I'd seen. But I know most of their, I know most of the names. All the names are recognizable. These are all people I've heard of and just never. A part of me wants to like read into them individually instead of through this book. This book kind of felt like a massive thing to like introduction.
Right. Yeah, I was a little surprised at how few of these films that I've seen, having gone to film school, and the 70s directors are like, you cover that a lot. They're very highly regarded and respected. So
when you were in film school, did you find that you were watching more movies that were after this time frame or before this time frame, or?
I think it was a good mix of, I mean, I feel like a lot of coursework tries to balance out the educational materials, but I also, with my film school friends would seek out films from, varying eras to watch in our free time too. Which a lot of these films are highly regarded as classics. So,
yeah. I also think it's important to note that this book was published in 1998. So, to view it from that, I mean, we're in 2025, so it's been a good number of years.
That's an interesting point and related to what Beckett was saying when she was going to film school. My first pass at film school was in 1980, 81, and we didn't really cover this material because it was so recent. It wasn't really, something we could look back in history. We spent most of our time in the silent era and the films all the way up until 1960. We didn't really dig into this period in my film history classes.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I would be interested in seeing almost how some of the opinions that are taken in this book, how they've changed over the past, 20 years. Since the book was released. About 20, 25 years.
A lot of the films, I'm sorry, a lot of the films near the end, which were not received well initially, have been looked at again. The most notable is Heaven's Gate, which is pretty much the end of the new wave. And Heaven's Gate got recut by what's his name, the director? Shit, God, what's happening to me? The guy who directed The Deer Hunter and wrote Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and I think directed it as well. Who am I talking about?
Michael.
Thank you.
Cimino.
Michael Cimino, right. So Michael did not make a whole lot of films, and a lot of that is because of the disaster that was Heaven's Gate. The important thing about Heaven's Gate is that most of the people that talk shit about it never actually saw the film. A lot of it was, we were talking about, what was it? We were talking about I think we were talking about a Friedkin film. It may have been Sorcerer, or it was some other film that was a disaster, and everybody said it was a disaster, and most of the people who were saying it's a disaster never actually saw it.
We were talking about Cruisin'.
Oh, okay. Yes, that's right. It was Cruisin'. And that was the case with Heaven's Gate. And when I finally got to see it for the first time around somewhere in the early 90s, I thought it was a good but flawed film that needed an editing, a good editor to go in and really work the story. And in 2014, there was a new release, and I got to be at the West Coast premiere at the Egyptian Theater. It had already premiered at Cannes to a very great celebration. And I was in the Egyptian Theater, and we gave it a standing ovation. And I was so happy that Cimino got to get he went to his grave knowing that Heaven's Gate had been reappraised and had been deemed a classic. And I love that for him, because I think now the director's cut from 2014, it's a fantastic fucking film. And it's finally getting the respect that it should have gotten in the first place. It did not. It killed the American New Wave. The American New Wave was on its deathbed, and it put the final nail in the coffin, but it shouldn't have been the final nail in the coffin.
It's shocking to me, and it shouldn't be. I feel like I used the wrong word there. Just how much of the industry is like, it's all gossip. Whether or not a movie succeeded and failed had very little to do with, I think, the standing of the movie, and had a lot more to do with like rising egos and
yeah, that and studio shenanigans.
yeah. I think when we were talking about this before, Beckett and I, when we met up and we were briefly talking about this book, I would describe this book as everybody in it is terrible, and somehow they all win. Like,
to a certain extent.
also, it made me question whether or not I should start doing cocaine.
I mean, it is a stimulant, so there's a reason why, these guys produced as prolifically as they did.
What is that that line from Blade Runner, that the guy who invented the replicants, and he has that discussion with Roy Batty, and he says, the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. And if you look at the careers of the people here, I mean, really the only one who had an extended career was Steven Spielberg, because he was taking advantage of the freedom that the American New Wave granted directors, but he was making studio films. He was making very straightforward studio films, while Coppola is blowing his wad on Apocalypse Now, which how that film ever got completed, much less completed in the manner of a classic, an acknowledged classic. That's astounding to me, given the disaster that Coppola had on his hands for the entire production.
So between this, and we also read Werner Herzog's autobiography and him talking about filming Fitzcarraldo, a part of me is just like, just don't go film things in the jungle, man. That is
Recipe for disaster.
Fitzcarraldo is the perfect metaphor to match with Apocalypse Now.
It was very similar in its language. Like, describing both of these movies was just like, oh, people are dying of rabies. Okay, great.
But, the same thing could be said about the production on The Godfather. That was how that film ever got finished. It's amazing to me.
I think the other takeaway that I really had from this book, and it's more of a validation inside myself, is how much of the movie is made by editors. Because I have always maintained that editors are the ones who make the movie. And especially even what you were saying about Heaven's Gate absolutely plays into that.
Yeah, I would say that one of my revelations in reading this was that how these guys just had no idea what they were doing. Like, in film school, you learn about treatments and production schedules and how to do storyboards and like things that to make your shoot go more smoothly. And it seems like none of these directors did any of that. and somehow they got their films done.
I think Friedkin is the one exception to the rule, and he's the one filmmaker that made more films than most of these guys, except for Spielberg. Made a lot of mediocre films as well, but his career somehow survived. And he was the only one that went into production knowing exactly the film that he was making. The rest of them, no, with the exception of Spielberg. Friedkin always he hated working on The Night They Raided Minsky's. So when that production was through, he threw he threw all the film at Ralph Rosenblum, said, "Cut it. I'm going to England to go shoot the birthday party, and I don't want to have anything to do with it." But he was deeply involved with the editing on his, next 5 films.
Yeah, I was actually, because I don't know a lot about Friedkin. I've learned a lot about him over the past month with the boys in the band and whatnot. But he was the only person. Like, I was surprised to hear that he was the editor of his movies. That's not a usual thing, and it's always surprising to me when it happens. Kurosawa also edited his own movies. And I think that shows, especially in their work, like it's a start to finish. It kind of reminds me of like looking at very, very detailed storyboards, which is way more popular now. So going into the movie and you're basically replicating a drawing exactly as the director's viewpoint. I feel like them editing their movies is like the equivalent of that. Like they knew what they were setting out for. And I get the vibe that no one else knew what they were setting out for. They knew the vibe they were looking for, but they didn't have any of the components together. And they were arguing with their writers constantly throughout filming it, and arguing with like their actors, and everybody had an opinion they wanted to throw in, and it was who was what. And that's why this book sounds very gossipy, is it was a lot of people trying to be a cook in the kitchen.
Yeah, and there's
Maybe.
a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blame going around for everything.
While we're talking about editors, an important point is that Hal Ashby started as an editor, famously working with Norman Jewison, who actually got him his first. I think Jewison may have, if he didn't produce, he had a hand in getting Ashby The Landlord, which was his first moderately successful film. But Hal, who I think is the humane conscience of the American New Wave, very sweet man, but he would, as is documented in this, he didn't know when to let a picture go when he started editing it. He would edit and edit and edit and edit, and the producers never knew when they were going to get the fucking film, and there are stories of certain films, I can't remember which ones, where he was afraid they were going to take it from him, so he gave the film to somebody to go hide so that they couldn't take the film from him. Hal's one of the great tragedies of this story, unfortunately, but
Yes.
but his films, it's something like Shampoo. It's hard to tell where Warren Beatty ends and Hal Ashby begins. But something like Coming Home and Being There, those films are Hal Ashby. Harold and Maude, that film is Hal Ashby. I just think he was the dearest soul of all these motherfuckers who were just such assholes during this period.
To go back to like the book and how it's written, it kind of ends with Hal Ashby, and that kind of paints the image of him kind of being the end game here. Do you agree with that?
Depends on in what way. I think Hal's passing put the cork on the bottle and said, "This is what we were." But as far as production is concerned, Heaven's Gate is what stuck the knife in completely. I think the center point really sits with Jaws and Star Wars. Jaws points the way to Star Wars, and then Star Wars is the ultimate destruction of the studios giving money to these people to make personal films. It was all over at that point.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of just superhero movies. Like superhero movies came out and that's now what makes money. So that's why everything now is a superhero movie.
This whole era started like the age of the blockbuster, right? And so it's been difficult to break out of that because nobody wants to produce any work anymore that is not going to be a guaranteed, box office return, with very, very few exceptions. And it's unfortunately gotten us a lot of mediocre cinema.
I mean, Star Wars is a Hollywood film. I mean, it's a throwback. If you want to really trace it back to its old Hollywood roots, it's, the Saturday morning serials that my mom used to go, my mom would go to see a movie as a kid, and they'd always show as part of a Zorro serial, which you would see the episode of Zorro, and then you'd come back for the film next week and they'd show another episode of Zorro. And it's kind of a throwback to those, every sequence is a cliffhanger to the next sequence. And Star Wars is very much a Hollywood film. Jaws is kind of where Hollywood meets the American New Wave, but it's the money that the studios here, they're like, oh my God, finally some motherfucker is making us money. That we can bank on. There's a formula here. They saw formula. That's what the studios and the producers saw. They saw formula and said, oh, this is how we consistently make money instead of make money on some and lose money on others.
It's a cyclical process. That was one of the things that I really wanted to talk about when I started reading this book, was like how similar like the pre-New Age corporate style of movie making is so similar to like what I'm seeing now. And then you have like United Artists trying to like break out of it the same way that A24 is currently trying to break out of it. And then you get all these weird movie makers. Like I just saw Eddington like a week ago by Ari Aster, and I think Ari Aster definitely falls into like this category. But like you also have like Wes Anderson or like these kind of new people coming out of it. Celine Song has had some weird movies. Just like this new style of cinema that I feel like is trying to break in and just really having a hard time finding a foothold. Or do you think that this has just been like a constant thing? Like, do you see this as less like?
I think that Peter Biskind points this out in the book. I can't remember, but actually he doesn't actually go in and say it. But what you read in the opening chapters of this book is you have a bunch of old studio heads who have no idea what kind of films the kids want. None of them expected Bonnie and Clyde to do well. And after Bonnie and Clyde was a success, they all kind of threw their hands up and said, okay, we have no fucking idea what the kids want. These young guys making movies, they know what the kids want. So we don't know. So here's some money, go make us a film. And if you can get us, the kids, we'll be happy. And so these directors took advantage of this, and and they wanted to make French New Wave films. They wanted to tell stories like that. And as that wore off in the early 70s, they started to become less successful.
Yeah, I asked that and bring up like the comparison to like modern day cinema, just because I do see some parallels, but I'm also not sure if I live in a bubble.
No, absolutely. I think that you're spot on with that. Hopefully we'll see kind of a continued break from the blockbuster format moving forward.
I think the other big takeaway that I have from this book is just how interconnected everything is. Like, this is basically just like 5 or 6 dudes just constantly working together and against each other, but it's like a very tight-knit, closed circle. And you're really only hearing their stories, so you're not seeing like the broader picture of like all the other independent artists. And I think George Lucas was the one that was just like he could see like theaters getting really into independent and just like having a bunch of theaters that only pay like independent movies, which was a vision that never got realized. Um, but it is interesting to think about this book just being such a small group of people. I mean, I was just talking about, I'm not sure if I live in a bubble, but these people definitely lived in a bubble.
Well, and these were not the only people making movies.
No.
Yes. I definitely want to discuss. It's always been clear to me that, and it's not these directors' fault. It's the people who put up the money, but the women got ignored. Joan Micklin Silver being the most prominent example. But there were women making films, but nobody wanted to, or there were women who wanted to make films, but aside from Silver, nobody got any money. And Joan Micklin Silver made very small, women-oriented films that did not go into the world, go into a big world. It went into a very small world. But for me, the one that always stood out is, and it's in the, I think this is the first time I've read this book since Me Too. I could be wrong, but it made the downplaying of women's roles in this era really disturbing. And the one that's always stood out for me, probably for 20 years, is Polly Platt, who was married to Peter Bogdanovich. And I have argued for at least the last 15, maybe 20 years, that Last Picture Show and the Bible salesman movie, Paper Moon, those films would not have gotten completed if Polly Platt had not been there. I would say she at least co-directed, if not completely directed, at least half of the Last Picture Show, while her husband was off fucking around with Sybil Shepherd. And why she continued to work with him, I don't know. But after once she stops working with him, his career goes in the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
His career goes completely in the toilet.
I definitely got the image that Polly Platt and Marsha Lucas were pivotal to the roles that they played in these movies. And this isn't the first time it happened, because when I think about silent movies, a lot of directors for silent movies were female. And that was probably because it was just like this corporate thing. The directors weren't really well known. It was more about like the stars in the picture as opposed to the people making them. And then once the people behind the camera, or rather beside the camera, like the directors started being known and the writers being known, they only pushed forward the men, and that kind of replaced them. But I think it is an interesting thing to think about that, like in the 1920s and 1910s, a lot of the movies were written and directed by women. And so it is kind of this thing of women getting pushed to the background because I don't know why.
Yeah,
it's a rough scenario to exist in. You have to have like a lot of balls to exist in this kind of environment.
Well, and when we're thinking about the time period, like the American mid-century was all about lifting men, and like really putting them at the heads of everything, and women stay in the kitchen. And in this world of like Hollywood during this era, women were sex dolls and nothing really more than that.
I think it was a thing about Marsha Lucas in the book of George Lucas thought she would stop working as an editor when she got pregnant. And she just kind of kept editing, and he was very much like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
To be fair to George, and I rarely feel the need to be fair to George, but to be fair to George in this case, she pooped a lot on Star Wars, which, for better or worse, that's his whole life is built on Star Wars. Well, and she pooped on that a lot.
There's a lot of thought about that too, that like we wouldn't have the original trilogy as it is without Marsha Lucas's involvement. Because if you read George Lucas's like original treatments, it is nothing like what ended up on the screen. So that came from somewhere, and it wasn't his head.
Also, she's a Scorsese stan, so that doesn't surprise me that Star Wars is not up her alley in the slightest.
Well, and the thing is, the interesting thing that I always get from this is that I think George really George wanted to be making the kind of films that Marty and Francis were making, but you know, he had this. There's a great line from him on the back of the book too, you know, about the success of Star Wars, and I'm surprised. I was surprised to hear this quote because it feels like he's kind of dismissing his work. But he says, "Popcorn pictures have always ruled. Why do people go see them? Why is the public so stupid? That's not my fault."
I think about this a lot because, like I said, I live in a little bubble. So me and all of my friends, like, we also like write movies and make movies and watch a lot of movies. And so we have this very specific opinion on it. And then I go hang out with like some other people who don't work in the entertainment industry, and they love movies that I think were garbage. And like, it's just this constant knocking down of like, I think my own viewpoint on movies of just like, no, if you don't watch a lot of movies, you miss the finer points. You're just looking to be entertained. I am a huge fan of movie theater sociology, of watching the people in movie theaters and seeing like who goes to see movies, because I go see them a lot in movie theaters. And I always think it's really interesting to see, one, who shows up, and two, how they show up, because I did the whole Barbenheimer thing, and I think about going to see Oppenheimer, which is like a 3-hour long movie, and like you could hear a pin drop in that place. Like, nobody was chewing popcorn. People were just focused on the screen, versus Barbie, where people showed up like with full, like in full Barbie gear or like blankets and everybody had food. And it's just like that kind of juxtaposition of it. Like,
it was weird to see those two films get connected that way.
I think that both of them were, I think that only became a big thing because they were being released on a big day. Like, I think it just made it a thing.
I think it had to do with, they were both summer blockbusters, and they both came out at the same time, and they were both originals, which is totally new. Like, we don't see that a lot anymore. We're getting mostly sequels and, you know, serialized franchises. So, and because they were like huge studio productions that were original scripts, like that made them special.
I think it was all just like somebody said it online and thought it was funny, and it just became a marketing thing. I go see double movies, double features. I always try to make sure that they are just opposites of each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's how that connection got made. Not that it was intentional.
Before that became a big thing, Barbenheimer was already a joke in my friend group. As soon as we saw the release dates, we were like, no, we have to do this. And we were already discussing like which one you see first. So, yeah, it was impressive how that worked out. But my point being, it's just, you never know what the audience is going to latch onto. And I think it was a huge thing of, you know, you show a bunch of movie people Star Wars, especially Star Wars without VFX. And they're going to watch this and be like, what is this? But you show a bunch of kids that, and like, pew pew. Like, so... yeah, it's very interesting to see the juxtaposition, and I don't think one necessarily killed the other. I don't think that like big movie hits really killed the independent, but it kind of did. That's kind of this book's argument.
I mean, I kind of feel like, you know, since the big releases of the 90s, it's all just gone towards this serialization of franchise films versus embracing any new ideas.
I'm looking around for the description of the early Star Wars draft, because I laughed out loud reading it again because it's so fucking funny. Oh, here it is. um, so he's writing a treatment, starts in 72. He was reading Joseph Campbell and Carlos Castaneda. And he hooked, Obi-Wan Kenobi was his take on Don Juan. And the Force was his take on Don Juan's life force. It says, but as usually had trouble writing. More than a year later, by May of 1973, all he had to show was 13 pages of gobbledygook. The first sentence informed the reader that this was the story of Mace Windu, a Reverend Jedi Bendu of Opuchi, who was related to Usby C.J. Tharp, Padawan learner of the famed Jedi.
There was back when this whole talk kind of started spreading around the internet about how Marcia Lucas actually was the writer of Star Wars, somebody put together I guess it would have to have been Lucasfilm, released a graphic novel based on the original treatments for Star Wars. And it was painful to read. And it was very much, it made me realize that the prequels, awful as they were the movies he originally wanted to make. He was interested in like the political intrigue of the galactic, what do they call it? The Senate, the Galactic Senate. And that was what he wanted to focus on. And everybody kept telling him, George, this is boring as hell. Nobody's going to care.
I actually thought that was really interesting in this book because they make a lot of parallels between like the state that America was in at the time and Star Wars. And I was like, I always thought Star Wars was just straight World War II. And at no point in time did they bring that up as the comparison. They brought up like everything else. And I had to like go back and look it up because I was like, no, it's World War II.
George has always said that it was the American Empire versus the Viet Cong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't see it. I didn't see that when I first saw it when I was a kid and saw it on first release. I'd made no connection to the Vietnam War, but over time, it's been plain as day to me. That this is about empire. I mean, it's very easy to spot with the historical distance that we have from Vietnam today. But I didn't know shit in 1977. So,
was there a part of this book that like called out to you, or that you want to like investigate more, like a specific filmmaker whose work you wanted to look into more or learn more about, or were you quite sated?
I think that I am interested in seeing more of these movies because I have only seen a handful of them.
So I went in and I forget how I did it, but I managed to create a list, which I will send to you, of every. The book mentions films going back to the 20s. I managed to cut it down to 1967 and forward, and then I created a sub list of all the main directors that are talked about in this book. If you want me to send that to you, I can do that. It's got Coppola, Scorsese, Lucas, of course, made fewer films than all of them. It's got Ashby's films. The other important person to look at who wasn't a director, and it's interesting that I think I always knew it was there, but it never really got really roaming around in my mind until I read it this time, was how important Warren Beatty was as a producer. And arguably some films that he didn't direct, he kind of directed, at least partly. So I mean, Warren Beatty is the one non-director who's really moving and shaking a lot of stuff during this period. Arguably some of the most important films being Hal Ashby's Shampoo. Is starring in Arthur Penn's Bonnie and Clyde. Eventually, at the tail end in the '80s, he directs Reds. He had his hand in everything, and he nurtured a lot of important talent. Robert Towne probably would have never gotten. I don't know how you can imagine an American New Wave without Robert Towne's writing, but I don't think if Warren Beatty hadn't been there, to prop Robert Towne up, we may never have seen any of his work.
Yeah, it is actually shocking how present Warren Beatty is in this book.
Yeah. On McCabe and Mrs. Miller, which he did with Robert Altman, which had to be painful for Robert Altman. I mean, I don't think they got along all that well, but McCabe and Mrs. Miller is one of the centerpieces of the American New Wave.
Altman wasn't discussed that much in this book.
And most of the time it's negative talk, but it's difficult to argue with the work that he put out at the time. Yeah, he gets kind of a short shrift on this. His treatment of people wasn't all that great either.
I mean, none of them treated people all that great.
No, they didn't. Donald Sutherland famously refused to work with him ever again after shooting MASH with him. On the other hand, Elliot Gould worked with him multiple times.
I do want to talk about, like, I think I said at the start of this, I really wanted to talk about Peter Biskind. I have not changed this at all. I came up with all of these like great slides, and I say great, all of these. I have slides. Anyways, this is Peter Biskind. And I do absolutely think that we have to think about his point of view, because his writing is very gossipy. And it is very much like anecdotal in its storytelling, and everybody is an asshole and everybody is horrible. Pretty much. And like how much of it, because it does sound like they were probably not the best of people, but like I also want to know how much of this is Peter Biskind talking.
Well, I mean, to be fair to Biskind, a lot of the shit that gets said is very gossipy. He's dealing with some very gossipy people. That's why I think the truth frequently lies somewhere in the middle, because the people that you think that you believe were close friends, the things they say about each other, is pretty, it's a little, cat scratchy kind of thing.
Yeah, I know Jack Nicholson really, really hates this book.
I mean, Nicholson comes off fairly well.
Yeah, compared to everybody else.
But Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese have also said that it is exaggerating their bad points.
I mean, everybody's going to say that about themselves.
Yeah.
And just because I do feel like the way that it's written is very anecdotal, which is how you have to keep a book like this to be interesting. There is a lot of information in this book, and I feel like you have to phrase it this way. Also, yeah, it's just kind of fun to read through that kind of stuff.
And ironic that you would say specifically Scorsese and Spielberg, because I thought they came off better than the other directors in this book.
To be fair, I think a lot of the directors that are written about in this book probably did not read this book or passed away before it was written.
Yeah. I think Scorsese does. Scorsese and Spielberg do come off reasonably well, but I think they mostly treated people better than, the other people involved here. But
they still painted both of them to be womanizers.
I mean, it's Hollywood.
I mean, less so than Warren Beatty. Warren Beatty comes off horrible in that regard.
Yeah, this book was very much like, as soon as he started talking about the sex and how these men would just like use the women around them. Oh, this is definitely before the Me Too era.
Yeah.
Especially with like
was
the character
particularly bad as well.
Who?
I mean,
Coppola was yeah.
But like the portrayal of the women too, as like, oh yeah, these men were womanizers, but these women were like, spreading their legs constantly at everybody.
He
Like,
does say that a lot.
okay, like, I don't know how much I trust that.
Just like how many of the women were saying things along the lines of like, I sleep with every director. Like,
I honestly believe, from what I know of the history outside of this book, I think the portrayal of Julia Cameron in this is pretty fair. Um, it's not a pretty picture, but I think it's a fair picture based on what I know.
Well, and not to say that it's not possible that, a woman behaves like that. I definitely have known people who do, but like every one of them, I don't know about that.
I think there's a lot of redeeming qualities that everyone in this book probably have that did not make it into the book. They were not painted as like divisive people. They were painted as geniuses who were insane and doing cocaine and cheating on their wives.
Well, and I'm not trying to slut shame anybody. Like, do what you do. I don't care.
Yeah.
But like, just knowing what we know now about how Hollywood was operating until Me Too, and still probably does, I find it hard to just take the men's word for it. And, there's a suspicion that some of that going on was more coerced than willing.
Outside of the fact that we don't really get an idea, we have to kind of extrapolate what Ellie Coppola's reasons for staying with Francis were. But she's probably, I don't want to say she's a sad figure, but it's the saddest story. You want to reach through the book and strangle the shit out of Francis just for the shitty way he treats her. And I love how Marcia Lucas, not stands up for her, but talks about how much she hated Francis for the way that he treated Ellie. And they're still together, or she passed away. She passed away, I think, a year ago or 2 years ago, but they were together all the way up until, she passed. And why, maybe it's her culture. I think she was also Italian, and maybe that's that Italian Catholic kind of thing where you just, you stay unless you can't. And I think the other sad figure is really Polly Platt, and that she never really got the recognition. Although she did continue to work. She was moderately successful working in Hollywood doing what she does. But I just think that she should have gotten more credit for the films that she definitely played a huge role in getting on the screen, back in the 70s.
Eleanor Coppola has a memoir, and a part of me is very curious about it.
I would be curious to read that. I didn't realize she had.
I also didn't. I just Googled it now. I was like, can I find more information on her? Because, yeah, you don't really get that much information on her. So, yeah, it is interesting decision. Don't want to make any assumptions about anybody's lives, but I did see that she wrote a memoir, and I am curious about it. So I wanted to bring that up.
Well, and you have to also consider they come from an era where, the man supports the woman, and leaving is hard because what are you going to do?
I mean, she also has a filmography set. Like, she was a director and cinematographer later on in her life. So it's not like she was fully dependent on him. She took a break. I think they met on a set. So she was working on film sets and then probably stopped to have kids and then did come back to it later on. So it's unfair to say that she was completely dependent.
I did not. Did Biskind mention that at all? I didn't know she had a career.
Well, I mean, her her most famous work is the documentary she did on Apocalypse Now, uh,
Yes.
Hearts of Darkness, which is very worth your time if you get an opportunity to watch it.
Most of her stuff is all documentary based on the film industry.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. She's primarily known as the director of the Apocalypse Now documentary.
Yeah, and then it seems like she wrote and directed a couple of movies in 2016 and 2020.
Oh, interesting. I had heard about it, but I never really paid much attention to it.
Yeah,
Bad.
I'm reading all of this off of Wikipedia, so
Okay.
Yeah.
do
Well, I mean,
your own research in your own time.
Famously, their daughter is a pretty successful director in her own right.
Yes, the Coppola family in general is quite prominent. Nick Cage is a Coppola.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah, no, the Coppola family is a film family.
Nick Cage is a Coppola?
Yep.
Yeah, he's a cousin or nephew or something.
Yeah, in fact, I thought it was really funny. When he plays against himself, he credits both, but under two different names. So he'll do one as Nick Cage and one as Nicholas Coppola. But he did, what movie did he do? Was it Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
No, it was probably the love thing with Deborah Foreman. What was the name of that? It was a cute film. Martha Coolidge directed, I think. Valley Girl.
So I think
he's the male lead in Valley Girl.
No, but he plays a bit part in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and it was his first time in a movie, and it's the only movie in which he's credited as Nicholas Coppola, and he hated it so much he changed his name.
Good.
And for some reason, I just remembered that little tidbit. So that's my little trivia fact.
I loved him in Valley Girl. I thought, but he hadn't acquired all his Cageisms yet.
No.
It's a very honest performance. It's a cute film. Probably didn't hurt that I had a crush on Deborah Foreman too, but yeah, he's one of the rare actors whose craft gets worse every passing film.
Yeah, I was thinking of The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, in which he plays himself, and he also plays a parody version of himself. And he credits himself as Nick Cage and then Nicholas Coppola. And these are all just random things that I thought about just now.
In retrospect, talking about the women, what we can say is that it's changed. We now some of our first-rate directors are women now, which still not enough, but certainly a great a shift from where women were back then, when Joan Micklin Silver was about the only woman you could find making original work back there. Barbara Loden, who was really only known for one film. So there has been a change in the positive direction.
Yeah, I was actually surprised at how many women were mentioned in this book, knowing the era that it comes from. But like there was the writer who was quite prolific, and then there was a producer who was like a known hard ass. I don't remember their names, but
I think the main thing that I think about a lot while reading this book is just that this was a time frame where movies like this were really in the foreground. And I think it's important to note that movies like this still exist. You just have to look for them a little bit. And I always like to just point that out because I watch a lot of movies and some of them are very, very good. And a lot of those movies are not talked about a lot.
Yeah. Well, and we mentioned A24 earlier. They're putting out a lot of kind of stuff like this, which is really good.
Well, they fund auteurs, so Definitely a good place to look if you're into something a little different. We are coming up on an hour here. Was there anything else that stood out in this book that you wanted to talk about? I personally want to talk about creme brulee with grapes because that sounds weird, and it was mentioned, and I can't stop thinking about it.
I mean, I just, in thinking about the films that Micklin Silver made, and there are a couple other women directors, they're very female-oriented films. Not that that's not a judgment. That's that's just an observation. Because I was looking at this picture, and arguably the great films that were made, for better or worse, those really are men's films. These stories, they're a product of the viewpoint of the time these particular men were coming out of. If the American New Wave had been female, it would have looked very, very different from this. So, it's one of those things you just got to take what they give us, and what came out of this are some of the greatest films in the history of cinema. But there were a lot of voices that did not get heard, so we have no way of knowing what kind of films those people who weren't the annoying, aggravated, get in your face, not afraid of the studio heads kind of guys, that made these films.
Drug-addled.
That too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that happens to be a product of the time that this was all going on, right? Like the decades before that were, like I mentioned, built to prop up the men. Like all of the studio execs were men. All of the people making the decisions were men. All the funding came from the guys who were making the decisions who were men. And they were
all
going
the people
to,
in the test theaters.
Yeah, and they were going to other men. And up until very recently, most studios have had a hard time wrapping their brains around, oh, wait, women spend money too. Like, men aren't the only consumers. Maybe we should be making films for women.
Interestingly, the one woman story that gets told in this is by Scorsese, and that's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which later spawned the television series Alice, which is very different from the film, but it's a very good film. There were fights over the ending, and I can't remember where I think Scorsese, I think he wanted to use the ending in the original story, which has Alice. Well, you guys might not have seen the film, so I won't.
It spoils it in the book already. So
it does.
Oh, okay. So how it goes from there, but really that's the only female-oriented film that gets made during this time that gets well received and is known, until you get to what's his name does An Unmarried Woman, which, if you have not seen it, with Jill Clayburgh, is just an absolutely Paul Mazursky directs An Unmarried Woman, and he directs a lot of films that are very, you can't call them men's films or women's films. He starts making most of his films, I think, around the time of the American New Wave. But if you want to see a great film about women directed by a man, I highly recommend Unmarried Woman, which I think Jill Clayburgh won an Oscar for her performance in that. Absolutely spectacular film, although I have issues with the ending. And I won't spoil that for you either. But go check this film out. It's just a wonderful, wonderful story of, a divorced woman living her life in New York City in the late 70s.
There's a lot of movies from this that I need to check out.
I will send you that list. I had one other thing that I wanted to pick up.
Post it in the group.
Okay. One other thing. Most of the people whose who say things in this book, you can more or less take them at their word. That was their observation of what was going on. The only person who consistently lies about everything is Robert Evans. And how this guy is held up as this great fucking producer. His career is so accidental. It's just amazing that he survived and went out with everybody thinking he was some kind of fucking hero, because he was so full of shit about everything.
I think a lot of this was accidental.
Or dumb luck.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, we have hit the hour mark, so I do have to close out the conversation for the evening. But I would like to thank you guys for joining me and for discussing the book, and I'd like to thank Tim for picking it.
Thank you for allowing me to pick it.
I mean, I didn't actually allow you to pick it.
You
suggested it, and then I added it to a poll, and I unanimously won.
So, which was very surprising to me.
I did take the poll down, but I do know what the next book is, and you should check out our Facebook group.
Okay.
Put it back on the screen, because I will be posting this along with our movie and music club picks tomorrow. So thank you guys for joining me, and I hope to catch you on the next one.
Bye.
Bye.